We are so happy and excited that you are here. Welcome to the Connected Wellness Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Rachel Ann. This is Marianne, and we are so passionate about wellness.
In this podcast, we'll talk about how our spiritual, emotional, and physical health is all connected and how we can take better care of our whole selves holistically to help us live our best lives. Come with us as we aspire to achieve connected wellness.
Yes. Welcome to episode 4.
Yes, Rachel Ann, here we are, episode 4. This is exciting. We're happy to be here with everybody, anyone listening or watching. So this episode is like super important. I think this topic is really important. We're going to talk about stigmas of trying to, reach out for help, especially like with your mental health. So yeah, types of stigmas, like cultural stigmas, religious stigmas, social stigmas. There's just so many things that we maybe don't even realize that prevent us from seeking out the help that we need. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
So yeah, we're going to dive into that. But first, we're going to talk about our wellness wins of the week. We always want to start on a high note, right? So Rachel Ann, why don't you go first?
Absolutely. Let me take a look at my notes to see. Okay, cool. There we go. So my wellness win was that I applied what we spoke about in previous episodes. It's just so funny. I wonder if God is like, cool, y'all talked about it. Now this is like a really great way for you to apply. Yeah. So I think it was last week, I had like a really difficult moment and I was like, oh, I really need to ask for support. I need to ask for help. I need to like ask somebody to be praying with me and for me about this situation. And that's going to require me to be really vulnerable. I don't really want to be like that level of vulnerability with somebody. But it was getting to the point where like this issue was really impacting me. In the psychology world, we use like the GAF score, our global assessment functioning. It was impacting my functioning. And so I reached out to a friend who's also, she's a therapist. A lot of my friends are therapists, praise God. And I was just like, hey girl, can we chat on such and such day? She was like, yeah, absolutely. And we FaceTimed. I bawled my eyes out multiple times. And she was a perfect person to go to for what I needed. I needed somebody to listen. I needed somebody to help me like bring words to what I was experiencing. She prayed with me. She prayed for me. We actually came up with a schedule of how we can continue to be supporting and updating each other about this, and how she wants to be supporting me. So it was a really, really good moment. It took a lot of courage. I was quite nervous, not because of her, but when you say the words out loud, it becomes real as opposed to if it's still just like in your head. And I think it's funny when people hear that as a life coach, I still struggle with things, people are usually really surprised. And I was like, no, like I'm a person, I'm not, I'm a life coach because I have really great ideas and I can walk with you to do that and apply that and help you understand the psychology behind it. But yeah, no, it was definitely a moment where life was lifing. And I'm really happy that I was able to have that vulnerable moment and receive support. So that was my wellness win. Really, really happy I reached out to her.
Yeah, great job. I mean, you said it was difficult and stressful, not because of her. And that's the thing. Like you can pick the most perfect person who will be there for you, but that act of vulnerability is scary, and we're always worried. Even if we know the person is wonderful, we're worried about being judged, right? Or how we're going to be perceived. So that is very brave, and I love that it's connected with the last episode. I mean, so great job, Rachel Ann. I'm proud of you. And I mean,
Thanks.
See how much you benefited from that act of vulnerability, right? From reaching out, and I'm sure you got so much support, and now your friend also knows that you can be there to support her too, since it's like that two-way street. So yeah, great job.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Marianne. How about for you? What was your wellness win?
So I've just been trying to like think about, maybe this is a little bit of mindfulness, just think a little bit about when I have certain emotions, like why am I having that emotion? Like instead of just kind of acting on it or being annoyed, because negative emotions are annoying. I kind of just have been sitting for a moment and being like, why am I feeling this way? Trying to get to the root of why I'm feeling a certain way. And then also with some negative thoughts or anxious thoughts, I've been using this that someone taught me a long time ago, focusing on what is instead of what if, right? So a lot of times when we're anxious, we're thinking about, well, what if this bad thing happens? And what if that bad thing happens? And what if, he responds this way? And what if, I lose my job? And what if? And it's like this terrible cycle and avalanche of what ifs. But instead, in the moment, I just stop and think, okay, what is happening right now? Everything is fine in this moment. Maybe I'm worried about, whatever, but in this moment, I am okay. My loved ones are okay. Nothing catastrophic is happening. So I guess that is more mindfulness, focusing on what's happening in this moment instead of what is, causing me to worry, which is usually something that may happen in the future. And I think, as we know from experience, most of the time it doesn't happen. So there's no point in stressing about what may happen. But yeah, I've been trying to just focus a little bit more on my thoughts and emotions as they come. So I'll call that my win of the week.
Yeah, girl, that's a huge win.
Yeah.
That is such a huge win, and it is very much mindfulness. Mindfulness can be really tough because we have to force ourselves to slow down and be like, before I react or before I even try to distract myself to go on to the next thing, let me hone in and focus on what my body's telling me right now, because there's something there. So what is that something? And what do I want to do with that something? And even in the times where you can't get to the root of it, you're still honoring your body by acknowledging and giving space for you to understand what is happening. Oh man, and that whole what if avalanche, I feel you. Yeah. It is strong. That is one of my most creative moments, is when I'm anxious. Right? I can't draw a circle.
We invent all these ridiculous stories that just come like, where is that coming from? Yeah, that's true. That's hilarious. I never thought of creativity. Way to put a good spin on it, right? I like that. But sometimes I would like to be less creative when it comes to, catastrophizing. I would like to have some less creativity. I like to be real boring. Just, what is, and everything's fine, just be thankful for the moment. But yeah, this is, I'll call it a win, but this is 100% a forever journey that I need to keep working on.
Yeah.
I want to take every thought captive, like the verse says, right? And not just allow these thoughts to run wild. Yeah, but that's probably a conversation for another day. Important conversation, but maybe for another day. So, stigma. Why do we want to talk about this stigma of seeking mental health care? As usual, it's all connected, right? Because one of the huge parts of our health that we want to take care of is our mental and emotional health. And sometimes, like we talked about last week, we need to seek support, right? We need help to do that, whether it's from a friend or from a professional, right? So we need to seek help a lot of the time. But some stuff is going to get in the way. So what kind of stigmas, Rachel Ann, are you familiar with, or do you think people can maybe relate to?
Yeah. Before I hop into that, I think we probably do want to preface this that we are not saying that any specific community or setting or mindset is like evil or awful, or we're blaming them and it sucks forever. But we are going to be highlighting very real nuances that exist. And a lot about being a person is living and existing in the tension of those things. And I think that's something that's going to be highlighted now. So if you're listening and you're like, I feel attacked, take a deep breath. We don't mean to attack you, but we are talking about things that are very real barriers. And we also provide solutions and how to go about it too. So don't cancel us yet. I wanted to give that preface.
Just to follow up on that, you and I are speaking from our own experiences too.
Correct.
So again, not to attack any specific group, but everyone has their own experiences, in whatever, how you're brought up or whatever in your life. And so I think it's okay to just speak from our experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah. So great job, Marianne. That was a perfect bow on the top. Um, so in terms of some barriers when it comes to seeking support and how stigma is probably one of the biggest one, is the idea that if we do something to better ourselves, if we seek support, that means we have to acknowledge that something is wrong. And there's a lot of stigma or negative, scary connotation associated with different types of help. Specifically things like getting a therapist, mental health support, going to a support group, all of those things. In my life and in the lives of people in my life that I know, so my support system, my friends, some of the biggest stigmas exist in church communities or religious communities. Other stigmas exist in their cultural community. So there are some cultural values that make it difficult to ask for help because there's going to be some type of fear, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. And then there's also stigmas behind the society that we live in that says that we need to be very individualistic. So specifically, when I say society that we live in, I mean mostly in the North America context. Both Marianne and I are located in the United States of America. And in our context here, there's a lot of independence and individualism, which can be really healthy, but also has some negative hardships that come with it too. And one of those is if you seek help, you're weak, and only weak people seek help, and you are born to be independent and, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and stuff like that. So in my experience, and in the experiences of people that I'm around, stigmas really, they just create those barriers that make it difficult for people to get support. And they think that there is a judgment or a negative connotation or something bad will happen, essentially is what it is. And it means something bad about them if they go on to seek support.
Yeah. So what I think is important to note about stigmas is that, it's based on like incorrect beliefs, right? So the belief that it's wrong to seek help, that's objectively incorrect. So it's incorrect beliefs. But here's the thing, like, it's based on usually lack of understanding about the situation, right? So that goes back to say, it's not attacking anyone who, has these beliefs or were raised like this. It's just that usually there's a lack of understanding about what's really going on, right? And it kind of leads to these incorrect beliefs because it's based more on like feelings and perception as opposed to facts, right? So I think that's where it often comes from. But you brought up religious stigmas. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So in the Christian community, there's been recent talk of something called spiritual bypassing, which essentially what that means is instead of providing an actual solution to the problem that somebody is presenting, or instead of like trying to find different support systems for them, spiritual bypassing, what it does is it provides a spiritual pseudo solution that usually ends up blaming the person, and usually makes them feel like they're not doing good enough, or there's something that's supposed to be done differently. So a very stereotypical example you will hear if you do research on it or in your own church communities is somebody being like, oh, I'm really anxious and I would really like my anxious thoughts to stop, and I don't know how to get them to stop. Spiritual bypassing would be, oh, that means you're not praying hard enough, or oh, that means that God is punishing you for something, right? Those types of things provide a religious response or a spiritual response as to why the thing is happening that usually requires a person to do more work, or there's something deeply at fault with them that is therefore creating this. So spiritual bypassing, other ones are like, just pray about it. What that does is it says that like all you need to do is pray and not do any type of action about it. And that one can get a little bit of sticky. Prayer is very important. We spoke about, I forgot which episode, we spoke about how important prayer is, but it is prayer and,
Right.
right? Usually when we pray, we are prompted to do some type of action. We
Mm-hmm.
are prompted to let it go and give it to God, but we're usually prompted to do something, whether it is to seek help or have a conversation or reach out to a dietitian or something. There's an action there. And
Right.
I think there's a lot of fear. If we do some type of action, then that means we're replacing God, or we're telling God what to do,
Mm-hmm.
or we don't trust God enough. And I think that's something we can always remind ourselves as Christians, is God knows our heart. So if we're doing something to replace God, then yeah, that is not a great intention. And that's something we should confess and repent about. But if we're doing something because we realize that God has given people gifts in the medical world, in the therapeutic world, in the, physical health world, and we want to be a part of those things so that we can better ourselves and become healthier for whatever the issue is, our intention is positive and is actually pleasing to the Lord, because we're honoring what he has given us. He has given us our mind, our body, and our soul. And we are stewarding that well when we are putting ourselves in context where those things can be nurtured and educated about and figured out, and all of the things. So it's a very tricky topic, because a lot of people hear, oh, don't pray, and a lot of people hear, I need to start to realize that I'm such a flawed human and I deserve all of these awful things, or they hear, I'm perfect and I don't deserve any of these hardships, and none of that is the case. And that's why I highlight the tension. Being a Christian is probably one of the most tension identities to have, because you understand who God is and the goodness of God and all that he can do, yet we're still living in the world that we're living in, where we don't always necessarily feel and see that goodness. So that's what comes to mind when I think of the religious community. It always comes from a great place. But I think it's a little bit misguided. There's also fear. We can go into fear and all of that. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a lot. And I have a lot to say about that. So first, I think that, of course, God doesn't feel badly about getting help, right? Because like you said, he's given us all these resources to help us. And let me hold on to that thought for a second. But I think where it comes from, sometimes from the community, is individuals who project maybe their own cultural ideologies or their own personal ideologies onto God, right? And because they feel this way, they try to use their faith to justify, oh yeah, I think that, mental health care is bogus, or, if you need it, it's because your faith is poor, or like you need to pray, like you said. Yeah. So I want to say that statement, I found it so powerful. Actually, I was talking about this with, I'll call them some of my little sisters at church, this idea. And one of them said that statement, very wise little sisters I have, that, this idea of, so it's the cultural and the religious stigma kind of mixed into one, because you have these cultural ideas that you just like assume, well, if I feel this way, God must feel this way, and you kind of mix the two together. So I think that's number one to think about, that just because maybe someone in the church, or even sometimes leaders of the church, teach certain things, that's not necessarily the correct viewpoint. And then the other thing about prayer, this is huge. I mean, and like you highlighted, prayer is always the right answer, right? The first thing we should be doing when we encounter any struggles, 100%. But it can't be just prayer. We have to work with God, like you're saying. And most of the time, I think God answers our prayers through the things of this world, through people in the world, through medicine, right? Can you imagine, like, somebody's sick and they have to have surgery, and everybody's praying, right, for this sick person to feel better, and the surgery is successful and everyone praises God. So the prayers were a big part of it, but the surgery was also a big part of it. So the surgery, the successful surgery, was the answered prayer. So I think that's huge, that, like you said, it's prayer and there's just a really cheesy illustration. I don't know if you've ever heard this story before, but I feel like I've heard it many, many times. So it's like a fable. There's this guy, there's a flood. Okay, he's standing on the roof of his house, and he's like, the the water's rising, and he's praying, God, please save me, God, please save me. He has very strong faith that God is going to save him. So somebody comes in a little rowboat and is like, yo, let me save you, come with me in the boat. And the guy's like, no, I'm praying God is going to save me. And he stays there on the roof, and the person in the boat just leaves. Right? A bigger boat comes along and says, come on, come with us. We'll help you get out of here. No, I'm praying that God will save me. God will save me. Finally, a helicopter comes, tries to pull him off the roof. And same thing. No, God will save me. God will save me. So what do you think happens to the guy? He drowns, right? Because he refused all that help. He gets to heaven anyway. And he said, God, I was praying that you were going to save me. Why didn't you save me? And he said, I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. Like, I tried to save you. So, I mean, that's like kind of silly, but I do think that medication, therapy, like you said, seeing a dietitian, all of these things that God has given us are these resources that can be the answer to our prayers. So prayers, number one, guidance from God through those prayers, right? Like, what's the best avenue to seek help? But the prayer by itself and just kind of sitting there is not going to be sufficient.
Yeah, and that was a really great analogy, because it makes me think about when people say, like, if they're experiencing a difficulty and they're like, I'm just going to pray about it, that's all I can do. One, they usually are actually enabling the issue to continue to exist by just praying about it, and instead of doing an action about it. I am not saying that I'm not being victim blaming, meaning I'm not saying you are the cause of the problem. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, if you notice that there's an issue and your response is just to pray about it, and you know what the action steps are, but you are not taking those action steps, it can continue to happen because there's actions that can be taken and it's just not being taken.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of fear behind it as well. There's a lot of fear of, okay, if the action step is to engage in conflict resolution in a healthy way, then I don't actually want to do that. So I'm just going to pray about it. So just pray about it becomes a scapegoat. That's why it's a spiritual bypassing. And we're asking God to help us, but a lot of times we're actually missing all of the messages and the signals that he's sending us. And he's sending it to us because he loves us. He uses people in many different ways to do the things that he needs to do. And it made me, while you were saying that, it made me think about a common analogy that I hear in the Christian community when somebody's trying to essentially convince somebody to care about mental health. They'll always say, well, if you had a heart attack, would you just pray about it, or would you go to the hospital? You would probably go to the hospital and be praying while you're on your way to the hospital. It is the same thing with your mental health. And it is the same thing with our emotional health and everything like that. You can continue to pray about it, but I don't know if you really want to take your chances that way. And that doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. And that doesn't mean our prayers are not strong enough. It means that God has a plan. We don't necessarily know what that plan is. And that's why partnering with God in prayer is so important, because he deposits in us what it is that he wants us to be doing.
Right.
So that's the fun Christian stigma.
Yeah, I think we're getting better over the years. I think since I was younger, I think it's become a lot more accepted, but it's, I think we still have a ways to go. But yeah. Okay, so we mentioned cultural as well, and for me anyway, the religious and the cultural are intertwined, because I go to a Coptic Orthodox church, an Egyptian Orthodox church, so they're very much mixed together. But can we kind of think about more specifically what kind of cultural stigmas could exist?
Absolutely. So culture is a fun one, y'all. So fun. I did a bunch of affirmations on my Instagram about how to engage with your culture in a way that's healthy for you, but still have your own personality. It's a very difficult balance, and one of the things that I talk and coach about the most. So when we're talking about cultural stigma, we're thinking about stigmas that exist within the culture of how you were raised. It could be your family culture. It could be the culture that you were raised raised in, meaning like your ethnicity and your racial origins and things like that. So the context and also the racial and ethnicity behind it too. Specifically, what I see is that in cultures that are more community oriented or collectivistic, these are cultures where there's an emphasis on supporting other people, on group mindedness, on thinking about how your actions will impact other people. I want to help my neighbor, and that's a priority for me. That's what I mean by collectivistic. Whereas more individualistic cultures, like I mentioned before, in the United States of America, the first thought isn't about the group. The first thought is about you as an individual. There are pros and cons to both of them. For the cultural stigmas, for collectivistic cultures, what happens is we get so fearful of what other people are going to think about us seeking support. So we actually don't seek support. So there's a lot of issues with pride, family image or group image. What happens if people in my church or a cultural group find out? Are they going to think that my parents don't love me enough? Are they going to think that we don't have adequate resources and they're going to judge me about that? So there's a perception that if you, from the cultural perspective, if you need help, like if Rachel needs help, then that means that my parents did something wrong, or my church isn't strong enough, or I'm not learning enough in school. So the shame aspect of it is more outward and impacts a higher number of people, which then makes me feel like I cannot get help, and then I'm going to be stuck. And then that's when we get into things like depression and anxiety and things of that nature. So that's the cultural stigma of it. Has that, any of that like ring for you or things that you've heard about?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think we did speak a little bit about that kind of image focus before as well, culturally, but also I think a big thing for immigrants, that a lot of times when people are immigrants, they really struggle, picking up their entire life and coming to a new country and starting from scratch. And so I almost feel like for them, mental health and wellness feel like luxuries. Like they don't even have time to think about their mental health because they're just trying to survive, especially add small kids into the mix, brand new culture, brand new language, like, trying to get a job. Like it's, so I understand that for immigrants, and then maybe by kind of extension, children of immigrants have this in our heads that, mental health care is a luxury. But now if we think about it, us children of immigrants can realize, okay, I'm not struggling to survive right now. You know what I mean? I can kind of move past this and understand that it's not necessarily a luxury, but a way to really support my overall health and well-being, right? So I can live my best life. That is the reason that my parents came here in the first place. They came to try and give a better life to their family. So I think sometimes just knowing even the root of some of these stigmas can help us move past them. So that's a big one that I kind of thought about with immigrants specifically.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's this idea that when you are an immigrant, all you can do is survive so that the generations after you will thrive. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But the sad part is that we're seeing the generations after struggling to unlearn the unhealthy things that they've learned so that they're able to embrace things like therapy and going to the gym and all of that stuff. It's hard to get out of survival mode when you've been born and raised in survival mode and nobody knows what thrival mode looks like. And super fun part too, when you do start to do things and for a thrival mode, which is therapy, gym, all of that stuff, people who are in survival mode start to judge you because they get mad. And that's a very real thing. Again, we're not blaming people. We are humans and we do a lot of very, very interesting things. And so I think that's worth highlighting, because that also is one of the reasons why somebody would not want to seek help is, oh, this person's going to think that I'm better than them. But all I'm trying to do is go to therapy and figure out why I have symptoms of depression. And my parents are going to think it's because I hate them, when in reality, there's just a lot of stuff that's going on. And I've never been able to actually talk about it. And a lot of communities are not raised with mental health language. The generation, like, I'm a millennial. So the one after me, I forgot which one that is. They're very mental health friendly. The terminologies that they're using at the age of like 15, like they know what anxiety, depression, panic attacks, all of that stuff is. But their access to social media and resources is available to them at a young age, as opposed to for me and you, that was not really the case. Right. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. And I remember I was speaking with someone, and they were talking about how they were really nervous to go to therapy. They're like, what if this person tells me that my parents suck, or that my culture is dumb, and that I need to like I love my collectivistic culture. I love being community oriented. I love thinking about how I can help somebody else. What if my therapist like tells everybody in the community my business? And so a part of it too is addressing those questions that you have, because there's very real answers to that. If your therapist is telling you to not be collectivistic, then that's a sign that you should probably go see another therapist. If your therapist is, behaving in a way that's rather ignorant, that's a concern, right? And you just find a different therapist. But most of the time, therapists work with you to figure out, or any type of wellness practitioner will work with you to figure out how you can exist in the space that you are currently in a way that's healthy for you and healthy for the people that you are around. And it's usually not something as drastic as like completely leaving your family or not talking to this person. Very intense situation. I didn't put a content warning on this, so I'm not going to mention it, but very intense situations, very rare and few may require that. But on the average, it's more so of like, oh, this is how you set boundaries. This is how you explain your mental health symptoms to your parents in a way they'll understand. This is how you respond when somebody is spiritual bypassing you. That's really what happens in therapy. And therapists and wellness practitioners legally cannot tell other people what's happening in the session. And so I kind of wanted to deep dive into that a little bit, because we will have questions. Our parents will have questions. Like you said, people who don't have information will likely just continue the stigma. So if you give them information, there's a chance that they will feel more comfortable with you seeking support. And that's a great way that you see that stigma starting to go away. And when they see you not having those symptoms of depression or anxiety as much, when they see you trying and seeing the positive changes that are happening in your life because of the support you're getting and the changes you're making, it could encourage them to do the same, or they could get really jealous and be mad at you. But in therapy and in wellness practitioner world, you learn how to handle all of that so that you can still honor them and do your own thing, And
I believe one of your fantastic affirmations said something along the lines of, I cannot moderate other people's reactions, right? Or responses. Which is a huge one. I forgot to mention when you mentioned them, those affirmations were absolutely fantastic. I shared them. I mean, all of them. I loved affirmation January. It was great. But those immigrant ones, I really related to it, and I found them to be very, very powerful. So again, I'm going to plug it. If you guys are not following Real with Rachel Ann on Instagram, you really, really should. Great content. I'm sure it'll be linked somewhere where you can access it.
I'll drop it below. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I appreciate
I'm really, really happy to hear
putting that up there. But you did kind of segue into the second part of this, which we don't want to neglect. So we've talked about, some of these stigmas, and there are many more besides religious and cultural and, societal, which we touched on a little bit. But what can we do? How can we start to change the narrative, change the, mindset a little bit? And you started to mention that now by, educating ourselves a little bit, by being more open and sharing. And, when people see how you're being benefited by seeking help, it may start to kind of open the path for them. So let's focus on maybe some of the solutions here, which we're not going to change entire cultural ideologies or anything. But,
Mm-hmm.
the more each of us take positive steps and, are open and educating ourselves, then I think collectively we can, make an impact for sure. I'll
Yeah.
start by just saying the first thing is to notice that even though you and I are speaking about these things and recognizing some of these stigmas, I still may have some internalized stigma, right? Like, and I
Mm-hmm.
need to be aware of that. So all of us, I think, before we try to even blame, these other groups or whatever, should think about it. Do I have any of this internalized stigma? I probably do, and not, that's not,
Mm.
again, a bad thing. It's just kind of maybe a byproduct of my background. But so when I think about it, and I recognize it, I think the first thing to do is to educate myself, right? So if I
Mm-hmm.
have said many times I have a lot of anxious thoughts. So maybe the first thing I could do is start to read up on anxiety, start to educate myself, first of all, see how prevalent it is, because when I see that it's so
Mm-hmm.
unbelievably prevalent, then I don't feel so alone. Like it's almost normal, unfortunately, to have, anxiety or anxious thoughts. So why should I think something is wrong with me if this is, become a very common problem? So I think that self-education first on my own, and then seeking out someone who is much more knowledgeable than myself, is a great first start.
I love that. And I'm moving around because my foot fell
Yeah.
asleep.
It's okay.
So pardon me moving around because of my foot. But and oh, sorry, I forgot to explain. I'm in a different place because I'm cat sitting right now, so that's why I am sitting on the floor. Uh, but yes, I love that so much because it makes me think about how, again, something we've been speaking about before, which is the power of vulnerability. When we can admit that things are really difficult with somebody else, that's a way to break down our internalized stigma. We hear other people having stigmas that they're breaking down, and we hear new information that could help break the stigma down as well. And so that's another reason why the power of sharing is just
Hmm.
so important. Um, One of the things that I, just like you said, I consciously have to do over and over again is something that we call unlearning. It's very long. You can look it up. But long story short, you basically just take the opportunity to think about what are the things that you have learned in school or in your religious circles or your family circles, whatever, and analyze if it's healthy or not. If it's healthy, you keep it. If it's not healthy, you unlearn it, which means working to not do that thing anymore, essentially. And so I think that's a big part of it too, is there's a lot of messages in our own families, our church communities, our different circles that we have, our different social circles, in society at large, where we have to unlearn some unhealthy messages. And that takes the courage to accept that. And that's where the whole balance comes in of like, I love my culture. I love my family. I love the values that it has. But there's a stigma that they have about mental health. That is something I do not want to perpetuate. So that's something that I'm going to
Hmm.
unlearn. And it's hard because it's normalized and it's everywhere. And we see so many groups perpetuating those things. So we think that we're the weirdos, that we're the problem. But really, if it's not working for you, meaning if it's not healthy for you, then that would be something that you would want to
Hmm.
unlearn. And that's one way you can break it. And then the last thing that I'll say is a very cheesy one, but it's be that change. Be the change that you want to see in that area. It takes a lot of courage because that might mean that you stick out and you're saying things that people don't understand. So you may have to explain yourself. You may deal with a lot of pushback or gossiping or people judging you about it. But there's a really good chance that somebody in that context will understand what you're saying and actually is struggling with what you are
Hmm.
struggling with. That's how the affirmations that Marian is talking about, that's how it came along. I was having conversations with people in different circles and I was like, oh, y'all deal with this too? I thought this was just me. And so I was like, oh, I want to create something for people like me in different circles so that they know that they're not alone. And this is affirmations is one of the things that we can do about it. So it takes a lot of courage and working with some type of wellness practitioner about boundaries and advocacy is really important. But when you are being that change in that space, you're actually operating in a more authentic space for you. And there's other people watching that have probably been waiting for somebody to say what they've been thinking. And they may feel so supported and validated to be like, oh, somebody else was wondering that too. I've never heard somebody wonder that in this context. So I thought it was just me. And I thought I was some person that I thought there was a huge problem with me and I needed to like repent because I had this question about whatever. But in reality, they were just waiting for somebody to also voice that that's something that they were thinking about too, you know?
Yeah. How powerful to be validated like that. So in being vulnerable and open, we help ourselves, but we have the potential to really help other people as well. Yeah. I love that. So yeah, let's just for the sake of time, move into maybe one brief takeaway. I'll tell you mine. So I think that when we talk about stigmas, we need to understand that people's opinions are not facts, right? It's not.
Ooh, girl.
Yeah, that goes for any.
Sorry, that was such a good one. That was such a good one.
That's so, like, if we can understand that and really believe that, I feel like that's going to take so much pressure off of us to, you know, conform, to please others at the expense of our own health and our own well-being. So yeah, I'll say it again. Understand that other people's opinions are not facts or truth. And then I need to think about what's more important to me. Is it what other people think, or is it my own health and well-being? Right? Because no matter what, sometimes we'll do our best to educate and help this situation, but some people are still going to be stuck in their, you know, fixed mindset, you know, and think that something's wrong with you or think that it's against God or whatever if you seek help. And, oh, well, what am I going to do about it? I can't motivate their opinion. I can't fix it. I can't convince them. That's on them. You know, all I can do is my part to try to create a more welcoming environment in my culture, in my church, in my family, whatever it is, and take care of myself. Right. So yeah, that's my takeaway for today.
That is so powerful. That's 5 episodes right there. I think my takeaway, I think, is similar to yours, which is like recognizing how difficult this work is, specifically with stigmas, in that stigmas are so normalized in many different areas of my life. And I'm in this process of inner child healing and learning about myself and all of that. And I continue to be surprised by a new thing that I just discovered that I need to unlearn or do something differently about. And it takes a lot of courage to admit that. And it takes a lot of courage to say, okay, well, I want to do something about that. And I realized that stigma was something that was getting in the way. Fear, how is it going to make other people feel, stuff like that. And so I love that you mentioned yours, because I think yesterday on Instagram, I posted my word of the year, and part of it was realizing that the word of the year for me is reclaiming power. And part of that was realizing I was giving power to other people's thoughts and opinions and realizing it was fact. And that was helping me to kind of stay and do the things that was unhealthy for me and perpetuating stigmas. And so really realizing, like, it's okay if people don't understand, but I will continue to do what's healthiest for me, because if it's my health versus somebody gossiping, thinking things, whatever it is, my health is the one that's got to win, you know? And you can explore how it impacts your nervous system and all of that stuff. So that's my takeaway, you know, is making sure that I remain courageous and figuring things out and removing the stigma in the spaces that I'm a part of instead of being scared.
Yeah. Yeah. I think taking care of ourselves, period, requires a lot of courage, because it requires change, you know, and doing things that we've never done before, doing things differently than we're accustomed to, differently than maybe other people are, you know, used to. So yeah, absolutely takes courage, but I think, you know, at the risk of sounding cheesy, you're worth it, right? You're worth it.
Yeah.
I'm worth it, to kind of be brave and do things that are difficult. We only have this one life, and, we want to use it to the best of our ability. I think we talked about this in episode 1. Like, I know God has great things for me to do, and I can only do them if I'm at my best, right? And that requires taking the courage to take care of myself. Yeah. So
yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. I love that so much.
I think there's still a lot more to talk about, and I think if all goes as planned, we can. Perhaps in our next episode, I don't want to give it away, but I think we'll be able to kind of dive into some of these things a little bit more in the next episode. Yep. So fingers crossed that the plan goes as planned and we're able to do that. But for now, Rachel Ann, how can people get in touch with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're watching us on YouTube, I'll drop it in the description below. If you're tuning in on Anchor, Spotify, or Apple, I'll make sure to also put it in those various descriptions as well. If you want to email us, you can email us at connectedwellnesspodcast@gmail.com. I'll put the link for that as well. I'll put our Instagram links. I'm at Real with Rachel Ann. Marianne is at Wabasaba. The podcast is at Connected Wellness Podcast. All of that is on Instagram. And yeah, that's how you can reach out to us. Let us know what resonated with you. This was a very, I feel like I needed courage to do this episode because I was like, talking about like culture and all of that stuff. So let us know how this was for you and things that you want to see in future episodes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope to hear from you, and we'll see you next time for episode 5.
Yeah. And you say what? Stay well.
Yeah. You
be well.
Stay well. So we can both do it. I will say be well, and then you could say
stay well.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, y'all. See you next time.